I was talking to someone the other day, and they were talking about how if we share our story in the context of mental health, when we talk about it, we go back there. When we talk about something, we go back to that place. And they weren't talking about it in the context of where my mind went when it extrapolated from that. It extrapolated that if I talk about the beautiful place that I went to within and experienced as the reality outside of me as well in mania, then maybe I'll go back to that place. So I can talk to myself about it on these videos and in a way keep those neural connections with that place. Or maybe just talking about it, the words and the sounds will create those epigenetic changes or those endogenous neurochemicals to take me back to that place. And maybe it won't be as powerful as, say, when the energy of the universe comes and takes me back to that place. But maybe it'll be enough to keep a little connection with it. And in that way too, by continuing to talk about it in a way that's non-pathologizing, maybe I'll create that context within myself that next time I go into distress, I won't pathologize myself and I'll be able to get through it. And maybe if I can't get through it, maybe I'll have someone to help me who's qualified to speak with me in terms of emotional CPR. And maybe I'll have brought that to Canada because I see that it's important to have a non-pathologizing way to talk to people in distress. And so also by talking about how I believe there is a beautiful world right here, right now, we just can't feel it. We're not sensitive to feeling it. Maybe because we're not sensitive. Because if we were all sensitive, we'd also be sensitive to the crap that we've co-created as our supposedly meaningful human lives. And we'd really want to change it. And that would be some work. Yet we could end up in a forest and just live in the beauty for the next 20 years if we happen to be in a forest. But if we happen to be in the middle of this society, we could be in a lot of trouble and danger. So we're not sensitive. And if we go into that sensitivity, we feel that beautiful world, we see that beautiful world, but then we're also sensitive to the one that we've created that's not beautiful. And the world that is out there, that's actually within us, is not something we have created as egos and human beings. It's something within that are all the innate human dimensions that, if we're connected with that, we unfold and manifest that in our part of the co-creation of reality. So I'm thinking that by speaking to that might help to create that. If I do ever make these videos available to my fellow manics, my fellow humanics, then maybe other people will resonate with that as well and choose to know that that's right there. But it's also a matter of bringing it out so other people can see it too. And we might actually be the vehicles of that, which is part of the embodied mania. So even though we're not feeling the extreme mania, still embodying the mania to, in a way, hold and express that frequency that we know is there. We're just not tuned into it at the moment. And I think part of it is because we have to collectively create it so everyone can tune into it. It's already there. We can go off into that state in personal ecstasy, but then we're there by ourselves and it has no value. So when we come back, it's important to uphold that frequency, uphold the highest of ourselves, not turn into the pathologized versions of ourselves that the medical paradigm would like us to be in, and to work towards that, because the more people that see what's already there, we'll create a different world. So again, by speaking to that, I go back to that place, which isn't anywhere else but here and now. Part of me is already there. And part of this is also about teasing out the wellness and the dreams and the visions, not just trying to fix illness. That vision, if we're able to connect with our vision and our dreams and flow towards that, that state of flow will heal us. Just as that energy, when it comes, seems to completely heal us and free us. The ego gets in the way of our vision, but we can still utilize the ego to create our vision. And I've technically attempted suicide, but I'm also attempting living. I'm not going to sit and do nothing because I'm afraid that I might go into distress and get scared and maybe attempt to end my life. I would rather die by my own empathy than sit around being afraid of myself. And that's the thing I wanted to talk about when I was talking about vicarious trauma, I think in the last video, was that vicarious trauma implies empathy, and extreme empathy, and my empathy has got the best of me on 3 different occasions, and I've ended up in the psych ward. And I don't think that's a failure. I think that is just how it is, and maybe it's difficult to work in such places with that capacity of empathy. It doesn't feel like empathy at the time. It doesn't feel like empathy. Empathy doesn't feel like empathy. It feels like pain of the other person. It feels like whatever the other person might be feeling and experiencing. It doesn't feel like empathy. And it's like extreme pattern recognition. It's the mirror neurons. It's identifying with the common consciousness and the common brain of humanity. Our perception links us to other people in that way. So if I see somebody and I look at them and I'm in that state, I can feel exactly what they're feeling. It's not separate. They even say if we look at somebody, they're mirrored in our brain. Like if they smile, their smile is in our brain. It happens in our brain. It affects us. Everything affects us. And so in the same way, I could look at a homeless person and feel the pain that they're feeling. And maybe I don't feel it that exact moment. It might come to me 2 weeks later, and I think, why am I feeling this way? Well, I saw that. I feel it's important to share our visions and our dreams and create this context, because otherwise we become consumers of the context of the medical paradigm. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that's not the only way for us to heal and move forward. And we can create a lot more context from our own understanding from the inside out, instead of relying on outside perceptions of our behaviors and them attributing meaning to it, which means pathology, when inside we're having maybe a rich experience of some kind that isn't necessarily pathology. I feel like the visionary experience is related to tryptamines, which is something from the pineal gland, from what I understand. I feel that that experience, the tryptamine experience, is ecstatic, but it's also isolating. One is in ecstasy by oneself, whereas oxytocin is, say, the next level down, where we are bonded with one another, we're collaborating, we're co-creating. And I feel the oxytocin consciousness is very important. I also feel the oxytocin is what would create these relational neural networks of being feeling connected and bonded to people, feeling like we belong. If we feel like we belong, we're less likely to disconnect and dissociate or need these ecstatic experiences or need to self-medicate. So someone might take ecstasy, the pill, to feel ecstatic, whereas if we all felt bonded and like we were learning and creating together, we wouldn't necessarily crave experiences of ecstasy. Ecstasy is almost like wanting to be alone even more, wanting to isolate even more, wanting to get away from what it is that we have created. We've created a dopamine dominant society, and I think we all are craving this oxytocin, because the oxytocin is actually what creates our neural networks. And imagine if we created a society based on oxytocin, on what gives us oxytocin. It would be a completely different world, probably designed by women. I invite you to create your own visionary videos and unfold the context of your own experience, and do so for your own self, and to have all that context unfolded onto video. If more and more people create this context, it'll be more difficult for it to be dismissed, and we don't even need to create it for being accepted from other bits of society, because together, if we co-create something different, there'll be a place for people that don't understand. And it's about creating dialogue, not debate. We're not going to be debating each other's internally subjective experiences or how we choose to speak about it. What is important is that a simple label might actually have hours of meaning within it. I also realized in my journey that I was living in a place where I was accepted and cared about, and it was a safe space, and there was no pressure to recover or get better or talk about things or anything I didn't want to do. Yet in that space I flourished the most, and I realized there's no pressure there. And the only kind of pressure that was there was the gentle pressure of love and caring. When caring people are just there and touch your heart, there's a pressure, a touch of that love energy that's not trying to do anything but just be there. And you feel it. You feel if somebody's pressuring you, and you feel if somebody's trying to coerce you. And I wonder if it's partly true that by trying to pressure somebody, it actually reinforces their ego in a way. It's like saying there's somebody there. How can I harvest how the universe repatterned me? I don't know if I can not harvest it. I think the harvesting is just in living it out. Even me sitting here talking about this is seeded from that initial experience 5.5 years ago. It was sort of like a rebirth in a way. Completely altered the course of my life. Also, Simon Sinek talks about find your why. In manic consciousness, the why finds you. The why becomes obvious. We're all one consciousness. I also feel like manic consciousness would not be necessary if we all took action naturally, if we were brought up in oxytocin consciousness and acting not based on our ego minds. But I don't think autism would be necessary either. I feel like consciousness is what creates epigenetic changes, because consciousness is more fundamental than matter. And it's also to do with the epimemetics and the evolution of consciousness. Different memes come out of the state of mania. No wonder they want people to shut up. We've been programmed into a disease of consistency, and manic consciousness comes in and opens that up. It increases the degrees of freedom, which may still include the ego. So one's consciousness has been widened so much, they can still act as the narrow band of the ego, but they have all these other degrees of freedom, and it makes them seem strange because they never used to act that way. I feel like once a person connects with manic consciousness, they're officially employed by the universe. They're employed by humanity to heal this insanity. The ego is actually alien to humanity because humanity is the collective humanity, it's collective consciousness. And for some reason, there was this thing that was created that made somebody think that they were separate from everybody else. And as soon as they did that, they wanted to accumulate stuff and control when it's all one thing. So the original separation was really this division in consciousness. So the principles that we have as children are go play outside. That's something that we do in manic consciousness too, as well as sticks and stones. We see that words can't hurt us, and we actually play with words, and we're the creator of words, and we can use words to create our life. Also, get off the couch and stop watching TV. TV is boring compared to the universe. This is just new memes. I'm an epimemetician. I'm an epimemetician. Memes from somewhere else. Memes from mania. Manic memes. Autistic kids are immune to the non-special messages of society. Yet they can still learn. Re-meming mental health. And mental health is a misnomer because mental cannot be healthy. When we're undergoing the process of mentation, we're abstracting about reality. We're not in reality, so we can't act adequately in reality, and that creates this distortion, which becomes the ego, which is out of proportion. These are just sounds that may or may not be made sense of. So I perceive something, EYE, perceive, and then I harvest it and I say it. I turn a perception of seeing something holistically into words and sounds, which are just vibrations. Do you remember that song from childhood? The more we get together, the happier we'll be. We're prisoners of sounds and images in our minds, and that prevents clear perception. If we can see clearly, we can act clearly, and there is no problem. I was re-memed by the universe. So I'm speaking the memes the universe energy gave me, channeled through me. They're nothing to do with me. If I never speak about it, it remains non-physical, and I'm making it physical by speaking about it. I'm making videos. Maybe this is like training for surfers of the universe, hoping that one day everyone will be able to surf because the tsunami is coming. There's something about the field of gravity. I haven't figured it out, but I realized that people who do floating to feel weightlessness and sensory deprivation sometimes go into altered states of consciousness. Something about when we're weightless, we don't have the ego so much. Maybe because when we're not in the body anymore, we're again weightless, and we're not in ego, we're more the collective human consciousness. I'm not sure how that works. I haven't figured out this gravity thing entirely yet. It's almost like mania is sensory deprivation from the ego, not sensing that image of oneself. It could be the image of oneself that experiences gravity because that is the collective image of oneself that we have within is what changes our physiology structure away from alignment with gravity. So if we were in perfect alignment with gravity all the time in our structure, we wouldn't necessarily feel gravity because it would be on our bones. The weight would be on our bones, not carried in the tension in our muscles trying to hold our physical structure up. So in that way we could almost experience weightlessness. But over time and just going through the field of gravity, it's like we collect gravity in our muscles by these different experiences and injuries that we have over time. So in a way, our bodies are like chronological time. They're like, we each have, say, 100 years, so it's almost like we're a 100-year clock, each of us. We could sit here and let the clock tick away. Or actually, I thought of the clock analogy of how if you move a clock through time close to the speed of light, it doesn't really change time or something. I'm not sure of the relativity experiment, but basically I realized in a way that our light body maybe travels at the speed of light because it's made of light. So, and there's a doctor guy who has a lecture called The Primacy of Consciousness. Can't remember his name right now. But he talks about how from light's perspective, nothing is happening. So I do feel like we have this adjacent light body that's traveling at the speed of light, but is also stationary relative to light, and that we physically are moving through time as our body, like the hand ticking on the clock. It's like each instance of time, it's like we tick. Our physical structure ticks in reference to our light body structure that doesn't really tick, but it shadows us, and I feel like it's our pristine self in a way. It's what we are without the accumulated gravity and experience of reality and images and sounds. So it's something to do with images, sounds, and gravity, and the light body is sort of clean from that. What I'm saying, each time it ticks, we get older, and we have, like, say 100 ticks, which is 100 years or however many days, but that's sort of all we have. But not only are we that hand on the clock that's going, we're actually affecting the collective structure. So perhaps if we're not in alignment with our light body self, we have that option, we have that free will to go off track of our light body self over time, but we can always be snapped back into our light body self. And I think it's like a shedding of the skin in a way. Each time that happens, it's like molting, and we go back to our light body self, which is our pristine trajectory of our adult child self that is unharmed. And then when we go into manic consciousness, we step into that, or we're sort of translated into that, and we feel free. But what I'm saying is there's something to do with gravity and light and our own experience, and like we are this physical structure, we appear as that, but we're not really just that. It's almost like we're here as that, to celebrate being that, as for the time that we are that, however many years. And we take it really seriously. And that's part of the disease, because kids are not born serious. That's the thing, I think, is that with these new gestures and the manic consciousness energy, these new gestures, they almost act as rolfing. So you can go get rolfed, and they'll work on your myofascia and get your muscles into order, and do that through physical touch. Or you can repattern how you use your body. You can work on your posture, you can repattern how you use your body in mania as well as embodied mania, after harvesting mania, and that is going to repattern our physical structure closer to our light body version of ourselves. And so we're going to feel ourselves less. We're going to be, if I'm sitting in a certain way and I'm in pain because of that way I'm sitting, I'm going to have ego thoughts about my pain, and I'm going to be thinking about myself. If I'm not in pain, I'm not going to be thinking about myself so much. And the ego self is an image version of ourself that is in psychological pain. So between body pain and psychological pain, that's creating this like gravity effect, and it's perpetuating that. So it's important to be in alignment with the field of gravity as well. And I think the manic energy puts us back into alignment with that. So we're a lighter version of ourselves. So we're not so dense. And the density could actually be the accumulated stress and strain. You know, if I take offense to something, it's going to be stored in my physiology. I'm going to hunch over ever so slightly, even if it's a fraction of a degree. It's going to affect me, and it's going to change me. And that's the thing with going into manic consciousness. One is free again and sort of immune to those hurts, and not necessarily because one's thinking, oh, I'm not feeling that anymore, but just because one's so joyful, one's so joyous, one's so happy to be alive, and one's just sharing that energy openly with other people. So part of embodied mania is just to go back to that and not be thinking, oh, I need to heal my pain, but just go back to sticks and stones. I have bipolar, whatever, I am bipolar. Sticks and friggin' stones, man. If you want to say I'm bipolar, or somebody wants to say, I'll say, yeah, I am made of light, because light is polar. I also thought about how, in an evolutionary sense, back when we were hunter-gatherers, we would have really had to use our peripheral vision. We would have practically had eyes on the back of our heads in terms of our heightened awareness of our surroundings. And now, over time, and with technology, we've actually been narrowed into looking at a screen, a small screen, and that's where most of our focus goes. And we're also focused on the mind screen of our own ego psychodrama. And when we're doing that, we're not focused on the outside image. So I drew a picture. How we're here, and then there's the eye, and it's seeing the person out there. But then we're seeing it through the old ego image thing. So we're not really seeing that person clearly. I know that's a really good illustration. I like to play with words, because playing with words is playing with worlds. And this isn't about focus. It's about when the focuser is gone. The one through which we focus our attention and use to categorize and clarify. The opposite of ego, focus, and knowing is not knowing, is being curious, is wondering, observing, being in the state of awe. The ego, I feel, is the factor that leads to mania and psychosis, as well as really loud engines. The heart beating in a certain pattern tells us what to make salient. The more people who can embody mania, the more we'll be able to surf over these memes of pathology. What does it really mean to be human? We connected with this in mania. Learning, playing, growing, celebrating, being silly, being kind. We know again what it means to be human. It doesn't take time to have a spontaneous social behavior. Mania shows us, I'm not what I thought I was. I'm not who I think I am. It's not about I think, therefore I am. It's I think, therefore I am abstracting about reality and not living in reality. And in terms of habilitation, I wonder which ways children labeled with autism are habilitated. I created this thing called random decontravisions in a manic consciousness experience I had nearly 2 years ago, which was basically putting on ankle weights and holding on to 2-pound weights, or having wrist weights on, and just spinning around and kicking around and dancing around in ways that we wouldn't normally move. I was thinking about how typically we lift weights in certain ways, and that's a certain way of moving to contract those muscles and get stronger, apparently. But the random decontra visions is actually moving in a way that really stretches the spine and also creates space in the body and the muscles, because one has the weights on the feet and the legs and is kind of spinning around and moving in random ways. So lifting weights is contrived. It's a contrived way of working out and getting strong, whereas this other way is doing the opposite thing. It's actually decontriving the body, because I feel it would also open up some of the ways that we hold ourselves that are us holding back from who we really are. And that's another thing about focus, is society has decided what focus is and what we should be focusing on. And if we're not focusing on something, then we can't focus, we can't pay attention. And they program us to pay attention to X, Y, Z, and children born with autism can't pay attention to that. They can't pay attention. They can't be trained like Pavlov's dog